Today's tale of heroism, courageous defiance, and sororal affection brings us to the subtropics of 1st century Vietnam, better known in those days as Giao Chi. A compelling story of two sisters of local nobility, Trung Trac and Trung Nhi, who dared to stand up against Imperial Chinese oppression which had shackled their people for over a century. Rousing the masses to defy the perceived all-powerful Han dynasty, these inspirational women started a movement of Vietnamese autonomy that would be the precursor and in many ways a blueprint to their people's eventual independence. The famously courageous Trung sisters are to this day a bedrock and wellspring of national pride and dignity for the Vietnamese people, who have a long and proud history of fighting against foreign oppression. Valiant warriors, acclaimed leaders, and fierce revolutionaries with a love of their people that surpassed all limits, Trung Trac and Trung Nhi were undoubtedly the living incarnations of ultimate badasses. The sisters were born into an aristocratic family in the second decade of the 1st century in the region of Mê Linh, modern-day Vietnam, to a local nobleman of the name of Trung Tiao. By all accounts, he was a respected leader in his community, known in the undercurrents of Vietnamese society for his defiance of Chinese rule. Early on, the young girls were noted for their intelligence and strength of character, surpassing in many ways their contemporaries and aristocratic peers. Their father's disposition towards Han oppression no doubt shaped their worldview, and coming from nobility they would have had a good education for the time and an understanding of their people's unsavory situation from an early age. The sisters are said to have been inseparable from the day of the birth of the youngest of the duo, Trung Nhi, and the eldest of the two, Trung Trac, immediately took a loving and proactive leadership role in guiding her sibling. It's very likely, due to their status and position in society, and with no sons to carry the family name, that the two young women would have been taught the tenets of governance, military tactics, and the art of martial combat. This unique upbringing, a potent blend of their father's influential spirit, a deep-seated love for their people, and a higher education, was laying the groundwork for a future of profound consequence and a perfect storm waiting to be unleashed by a series of pivotal tragedies that would unfold later in their lives. Life under the iron fist of Imperial Chinese forces had been unbearable for the people of Giao Chi for almost a century by the time the Trung sisters were born. But things were getting worse, and there had been several fresh policies that pushed their oppressive subjugation deeper and further than ever before. Higher tax rates, state-enforced abolition of Vietnamese customs, increased military conscription, and forced adoption of Han language and culture were just some of the nefarious injustices the people now had to live under. Civil unrest was at an all-time high and grew with each passing year. Any and all disobedience was swiftly and harshly dealt with by the Han dynasty. Forced labor, the barbaric practice of public castrations and beheadings, were some of the cruel and inhumane measures dished out for the act of treason against the native population. These punishments were not only limited to the perceived perpetrator, but if the offense was seen as causing the regime to lose face, it would be exacted upon the whole family of those who dared to defy Chinese rule. It was not uncommon for whole bloodlines or entire villages to be systematically exterminated for the crime of rebellion. While seen as a justified response to Vietnamese defiance by the imperial forces, it only garnered more resentment towards the Chinese occupation. While the exact year remains shrouded in the mists of time, upon witnessing one too many of these wretched tortures and senseless killings of his people, the father of the Trung sisters, the respected Trung Tiao, would no longer stand idly. He had begun to formulate and fund a local resistance force to liberate his community from the destruction and suffering wrought on them by the Han colonizers, becoming a pivotal figure in the fight for freedom for his people. Being a local leader of official standing, Trung Tiao had to work with and under the Han authorities in the region and was now playing a dangerous game of living a double life. We can only guess at how many years this elaborate charade lasted and speculate at the intricacies of the game of cat and mouse that he played during those days. But what we do know is that, driven by the love for his people, the head of the Trung house met his end between 30 and 33 AD, executed by Han officials at the behest of the Han governor, who had presumably found out about the truth of his clandestine activities and where his true allegiance lied. There are some accounts, which cannot be easily verified, of there being an altercation during his apprehension at the family home, and that Trung Tiao may have died trying to defend his daughter's honor from overzealous Han officials who had egregiously overstepped the boundaries of their duties. Regardless of the precise circumstances, Trung Tiao met his demise with honor and dignity, standing defiant in the face of an oppressive foreign regime that was systematically slaughtering his people, and his martyrdom would prove to be far from futile. What followed was a shared grief that rippled throughout the community and surrounding areas, which quickly turned from tears of sorrow to tears of incandescent anger, further entrenching the local populace into their footholds of defiance. The Trung sisters were understandably devastated beyond consolation, their great protector and honorable father brutally taken from them so suddenly right before their eyes. On top of this great injustice, the husband of the eldest daughter, the resistance leader and lord of Chaozien, of the name Ti Sac, was also assassinated. Murdered in 39 AD on the orders of a Chinese general who had uncovered a conspiracy of local Vietnamese lords who were planning to overthrow the Chinese. The young women, who had suffered all they could by the blood-soaked hands of the Han, were now in their prime of their lives, and by this time were consumed with bloodlust for vengeance. Trung Trac assumed leadership of the resistance, and with an undying rage the sisters ignited the powder keg that was Mei Ling, bringing with them the pent-up fury of thousands of victimized Vietnamese men and women upon the unsuspecting heads of their imperial oppressors. Soon after her husband's death, Trung Trac and her sister, with other members of the aristocracy, rallied their underground network of resistance fighters, local military personnel, and willing peasantry to march upon the town of Lien Lao, a Chinese-held stronghold. The siblings stormed the gates with superior numbers and, armed with swords, spears, and bows, successfully routed the Chinese commander and his forces stationed there. This early victory in their campaign marked a pivotal turning point of the power dynamic in the immediate area, and was a significant milestone for the resistance. After seeing this initial victory and witnessing firsthand that the Chinese were no longer untouchable, revolutionary sentiment spread like wildfire through the people in the region. The number of their forces swelled with the very real and tangible hope of Vietnamese independence in sight, climaxing at around 80,000 men and women at arms, not counting logistical, administrative, and medical personnel. The sisters made Lien Lao their base of operations and pushed further into larger local settlements, expertly keeping supply lines open and implementing effective guerrilla tactics, often against any imperial forces caught unawares. In 40 AD, a much larger attack was made against the capital of the Giao Chi region, Ko Liao. Fierce fighting took place, and victory appeared far from reach. However, at a crucial moment in the battle, it is fabled that the sisters rode charging elephants, which were usually used only for logistics, onto the battlefield and rallied their impassioned forces to victory. The national heroines of Vietnam were noted and highly regarded not only for their bravery and martial prowess in the maelstrom of battle, but also for their superb leadership qualities and strategic prowess under pressure. Taking Ko Liao, a significant ancient capital city of Vietnam, expanded the resistance's power and influence greatly while substantially diminishing the Chinese stranglehold on the people of North Vietnam. For the first time in nearly 150 years, their countrymen were tasting the sweet fruits of freedom, and their laborious liberation was at hand. The city of Ko Liao had been the backbone of the Han Dynasty's logistical, military, and administrative power in the region. With this now gone, the revolution truly had an advantaged anchorage to operate from. Over the next year, the Trung sisters secured victory after victory, crushing Chinese opposition at every turn, thwarting innumerable counterattacks, and spectacularly taking 65 strategic imperial forts and positions throughout the region. These conquests eventually culminated in them creating an autonomous zone stretching from the Chinese-Vietnamese border to the modern-day city of Hue in central Vietnam, an impressively vast area stretching nearly 350 miles. Remarkably, such was their overwhelming popularity with the newly liberated population that they were then jointly crowned the queens of the independent state that was named Ling Nam. Not much is known about their reign except that they implemented the abolition of the harsh Han policies, re-establishing Vietnamese customs and governance, while also bringing relative peace to the newly acquired territories. This was a time of jubilation and hard-earned hope for the Vietnamese people, that is, till the fateful year of 42 AD and the return of the Han Dynasty. Word about the autonomous zone had reached the Chinese Emperor Guangwu, who was undoubtedly furious at the humiliation of the undertrained and ill-armed Vietnamese resistance defeating his imperial forces and undoing the work of his forefathers who had colonized the region. He sent out one of his most experienced and capable military leaders, General Ma Yuen, to put out the faraway flames of revolution, and demanded the heads of both of the sisters to be delivered to him personally, giving the general command of over 20,000 of his finest regular troops, with extra auxiliary detachments and a heavy naval contingent totaling around 35,000 well-armed and highly disciplined men. As the sizable Chinese force entered into the boundaries of the newly established independent state of Ling Nam, the general and his advisors agreed upon utilizing the local terrain to their advantage and using their naval contingent as a round-the-clock supply chain. Both of these decisions would prove to be instrumental alongside the Han's standard military practice of building temporary forts as the army rested when on campaigns, which extensively limited the effectiveness of ambushes and guerrilla tactics that the Trung sisters had used with great effect in their earlier clashes with imperial forces. After several skirmishes and the retaking of around a dozen forts previously lost by the Han Dynasty in the years prior, the first large-scale battle we have on record between the two massive forces, the 80,000 Vietnamese resistance fighters and the 35,000-strong Chinese army, is at the Battle of Lang Bak. As the front lines crashed into one another and sword and spear clashed, the fighting was fairly evenly matched for a time, with neither side taking the initiative. But as the battle wore on, cracks in the lines of the Vietnamese forces started to appear, and they were beginning to be pushed back and overcome by the more disciplined imperial army. General Ma Yuen had expertly used the highlands surrounding Lang Bak to his advantage and put his troops in a favorable position, which was now taking its toll on the Vietnamese forces. After a prolonged and bloody conflict, the resistance fighters began to rout and flee, with several thousand being captured and decapitated. The Trung sisters just managed to escape with their lives. This substantial and costly loss marks a turning point in the war, one which the Vietnamese forces never truly recovered from. The Chinese army, under the orders of their general, split into smaller contingents and pursued the fleeing revolutionaries, not allowing them to regroup or ever marshal such a massive force again. General Ma Yuen pushed the advantage and continued to pursue the resistance forces, resulting in many other smaller battles which further weakened the fighting capacity of the Vietnamese freedom fighters. Although they fought bravely and with a valiant effort, they could not regroup in any meaningful way, and their arms were no match for the more technologically advanced Chinese, who are noted for using heavy cavalry, metal plate armor, and crossbows en masse at the time, with great efficiency against the courageous but ill-prepared defenders of their homeland. The Trung sisters commanded what little forces they had left for a final stand near the Red River Delta, present-day Soi Tan area, their revolution coming to an end with a final defeat here. With no hope of overcoming the now substantially bigger Imperial army, those fearless and dauntless few who refused to run in the face of annihilation stood their ground and spilled their last drops of blood for their queens and motherland. Accounts vary between the Chinese and Vietnamese renditions of the ultimate demise of the queens of Linh Nam. According to imperial records, the heads of the sisters were delivered to the emperor by the general as promised. In the Vietnamese telling of the story, the heroines, in one last act of defiance, committed suicide and threw themselves into the Hat Giang River, so not to give the Emperor Guang Wu the satisfaction of his request, and for one final time show the Han Dynasty that the Vietnamese heart would never surrender to the power of foreign oppressors. The Trung sisters' story is one of tragedy, unwavering courage, maternal love for their people, and defiant independence. They are, to this day, rightfully revered in Vietnam for their acts of self-sacrifice and bravery amidst the powers of foreign intervention. Throughout the centuries since their day, they have given strength to every Vietnamese generation who has had to fight against similar tyranny. Having two pagodas, one in Hanoi and the other in Hat Mon, named after them, and an avenue in Ho Chi Minh City, their efforts of fighting for Vietnamese independence are resolute in the hearts of their descendants to this day. These great women show us that no matter the odds or what persecutions we face in our lives, with courageous intent and an unyielding love for one another, we can defy the most evil of oppressors, and our actions can ripple through time to motivate others to do the same. Trung Trac and Trung Ni are both without a doubt cemented in history as ultimate badasses.